Hey guys, welcome to The Disruptors, the show where we quite literally get the folks transforming the world and how we think about it. Today we've got one of them. He's a little bit modest. That's okay. Sam Watts. Sam, thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Sam, you're one of the leading guys when it comes to VR, and that's what I want to jump into initially. But first, what got you here? Are you a nerd? What's the story?
Well, I'm a nerd, a geek, everything above. I've been interested in computers since a small child, many decades ago. These youthful good looks belie my true age. But it was like in the early 90s, there was a centre in London called a Trocadero Centre, and they had some of the very early virtuality VR arcade machines. And getting to try those out as a young child sort of gave me that taste of the future, of the possibility of what will be. And then at university, we studied cave environments and created content for those. And then I got the idea, but the shuttered glasses and the projection screens, I got a lot of headaches from working with those. But then, 5 years ago, when the Kickstarter, the DK1, became available and it became cheap, then that was the true sort of calling, really, to actually go on a journey of discovery and determine exactly how this technology could work and benefit people.
So, I want to clarify something. The caves. What do you mean by that?
It's the multi-channel, multi-sided projection boxes. Basically, you stand in the middle of them,
Like a mini IMAX?
um, like a mini
A
what?
mini,
Sorry.
a mini IMAX theater?
Um, Sort of, but what are they? Oh, I can't remember what it stands for. Probably like computer augmented virtual environment or something like that. But they're five-sided. You project onto each side, and then you have a PC that does all the morphing and blending between all the different walls. So you actually have like a projected computer environment around you, and it's good for. There's a couple of systems nowadays like Igloo Vision. They have a big 360-degree version, and it's a way of being sort of first stage immersed with multiple people without having to wear a headset.
We've come a long way. Initially, VR was mainly the Silicon Valley guys that wanted the digital psychedelics, more or less, right? That and
Yeah,
sci-fi authors.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up reading the sci-fi dystopian, cyberpunk future of virtual reality, and whilst those experiences are you know great and have their place, I very much like to see technology benefiting people and driving us forward and providing positive experiences rather than enslaving us.
Yeah, the nature of dystopia is it sucks. Which of those were most transformational for you or most impactful?
Um, well, obviously books like Snow Crash and Necromancer, but then the sort of non-direct ones as well, like Young Ladies Illustrated Primer or Diamond Age, as it's also known. A lot of the sort of 90s sci-fi that led up to films like Matrix and Existenz and other great VR film tropes, really.
What would you say is the most realistic, given where we're headed, based off your opinions, obviously?
Um, well, I like to think they're all still based in sci-fi, and where we're headed is still very much unknown. And through inclusion and diversity, we can create a whole load of content that's suitable for everyone, as opposed to just white Silicon Valley boys.
That hopefully we pull that off. We don't want
Yeah.
another Facebook situation. Where are we at? Speaking of Facebook, where are we at these days in terms of VR? Get us up to speed on those last 2 decades or so.
Last 2 decades, wow. Okay, so in the 90s was the last sort of commercial attempt, and that didn't really work. A lot of the hardware was kind of there, but a lot of the actual computing processing power to create the 3D graphics at a level that were believable or comfortable or actually worthwhile using were just wasn't there yet. But NASA, the military, they carried on driving away and working on their own versions of lowercase and uppercase virtual reality sort of headsets and virtual environments and multi-channel projection systems, full flight simulators, that kind of thing. And then if you have to take into consideration like the original iPhone, EYE phone from VPL with Jaron Lanier. A lot of what that did back in the 90s, we still haven't actually matched that today. But just everything that's available today is a lot cheaper to create and a lot more powerful with a lot lower latency and higher screen resolutions. But that sort of idea of the haptic input glove, there's a lot of people trying to replicate that and trying to get there with both hands. But we're still stuck in this prototype stage of terrifying exoskeleton systems and lots of cables. But the past sort of 10 years are the most interesting because that's when computers got powerful enough to create realistic 3D renders and super high frame rates, and the screen technology was cheap enough, but also gave us the super high screen resolutions. We're still not there. We have like the Vive Pro, and we have 2.5 or some in very low number 5 and 8K screens, but we're looking at 10, 12K screen resolutions to sort of be able to project a system that gives you that more sort of natural visual clarity without being able to see in between the pixels.
And for an analogy, it's like if you wear contacts and you have one lens in and one out, or the numbers just aren't quite right, you start to get dizzy when things don't quite map to reality. What do we need in terms of pixel density, in terms of like a 12K, a 4K, etc., to be at parity with what real life is?
Well, I guess the closest analogy, and it's called the screen door effect, is it's not actually something we have here in the UK really, but like in America and other hotter countries, where you actually have a fine mesh in a door frame to keep bugs and stuff out. It's like looking through that, so you can actually see the lines of the mesh distorting your vision or blocking out, fine parts of your vision. But in terms of pixel densities, I'm not a technical person, but we're looking at like sort of probably, I don't know, 1,000 sort of pixel density rather than where we're at currently, which is around sort of 200-300.
So it's still a little ways to go, but not that far off. Yeah,
No, I mean the technology is advancing quickly, and if we look at see what's happening with TVs with OEM OLED and 8K screens coming to TVs, that kind of technology will trickle down. It will get smaller and smaller and cheaper to reproduce on a screen big enough to give you that sort of field of view.
big enough and also light enough. If your head's a little heavy, it gets tough.
Yeah, I mean, some of the headsets at the moment, there's like super field of view headsets like the Pimax and the Star VR. They give you sort of like, I think it's like about 270 degrees, but they have this sort of massive triangle on the front of your face. And I've not tried one, but they look incredibly heavy in comparison.
Is the future just cloud-based compute and then some type of glasses? Or
I think ideally, yeah. I mean, we'll look to 5G, I don't know, 6, 7, 8G, whatever. But 5G is the sort of immediate standard that's going to turn around and allow us to, rapidly download and stream applications over the network rather than having to install everything locally on hard drives and deal with the display technology. We can just stream it over the cloud straight to the device rather than having to take all this extra processing power and weight to cope with that.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. You need the hardware small enough and cheap enough, yet you also need the content. Which side is a bigger driver, do you think?
Well, I mean, I see it. There's like a whole range of technologies. I see it like a pan of milk that you're, slowly simmering away, and it's like all of these technologies slowly bubble up together until it just reaches that temperature where the whole lot just, explodes and goes mainstream. But yeah, there's all these technology drivers, but there's also the questionable, content is king, and everybody needs to have a reason to get into virtual reality to buy the hardware. But there's a lot of talk, if you look at traditional console sales or other devices, they talk about a killer app. I wouldn't necessarily say or agree that there has to be a killer app that will drive VR, because it's a new medium. It's not it's not a peripheral. It's not just a display technology. The way that content is created and the range of experiences and use cases available, um, it's so personal. It's like watching TV. There wasn't one. So the switch to color was a big driver for TV. But these days, if you look at what makes TV popular, everyone has different tastes. There's different genres. People like, soap operas, or they like the news or whatever, the sports, etc. There's just like all these different content types, and there just has to be enough of them to give people that much choice to have a reason to put the headset on. It's like, okay, I can watch the football, or I can watch the NASCAR, or I can watch the latest 360 news bulletin from the Weather Channel with the mixed reality sort of hurricane warnings. Or I can play a game, or I can do some training, I can better myself, I can do some education. But then the chicken and the egg is the money and the funding to create that content when the market size isn't big enough to support it currently.
Yeah, that's you got to jump the hurdle, so to speak. I think about it like the entertainment escape velocity, the experience escape velocity. It's like with Netflix. Once there's enough content on there and enough created consistently that you can't finish up the content, that's when the takeoff really happens. I imagine VR
Yeah.
will be similar.
Yeah, I mean, there's already a lot of content for VR. If you look at the main platforms, if you look at like the Oculus Store, the Steam Store, and the PlayStation VR Store, PlayStation has over 200 titles. Steam theoretically has well over 2,000 applications that support virtual reality, whether it be the Vive or the Oculus or the Windows mixed reality. The Oculus Store, I think they're up to like 400-500 titles at least now. And there's plenty of choice on there, but there's a lot of very similar content. There's a lot of shooters, and there's a lot of sort of low-hanging fruit type experiences, or there's a lot of experiences that aren't, they're very much cable TV as opposed to prime time levels in terms of polish and budget. But yeah, but then there's other channels, through Jaunt or through YouTube, you can download loads and loads of 360-degree content, which is slowly becoming like a Netflix in VR.
It is, but it has to be that much better than the YouTube experience to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, and then we get back to the bandwidth situation where, combined with the high resolution display, combined with high resolution 360 video or 180-degree video, because people think 4K TV looks great, 4K 360 video doesn't, because it's 4K all the way around. So it needs to be considerably higher to get that level of fidelity of what people are used to. And similarly with the 3D generated experiences, unless you have like the latest kick-ass high-end gaming PC, most of the graphics are mobile quality or PlayStation 3 quality. And if you look at a lot of the gamers, they're all about the shiny and the latest, best looking graphics and games and everything else. But that's because they're used to just seeing it on a 2D pancake screen, not really taking into consideration the amount of processing that has to be done for VR and both eyes and the depth and everything else.
Could you reduce it over time? I feel like if you ever go to someone's house and they have that fancy TV, you notice right when you start watching, but as the show progresses, you don't notice it. It's the exact same as any other Pixel TV. You're just plugged in and you're in flow. But I imagine you could reduce over time throughout an experience, reduce the bandwidth, and then just reset at the top for the next one.
Well, I guess the kind of equivalent would be the foveated rendering, where we'll be able to just render where people are looking at super high detail, and then all the rest will be low detail, and then quickly switching to the high detail depending upon where they move and where they look. But I think, yeah, I mean, you would like to think people get so lost in the experience they don't necessarily notice that the actual quality is degraded. But then you need to be able to compensate for the fact that they could stop and just look around at any time. But then that's the other problem as well when you're in the world. Um, like the real world, you want to be able to pick everything up, and every time you can't pick something up when you expect to, then you break that connection and you break that sense of presence. So it's 4 times the amount of work having to ensure that everything is interactable, but at the same time 4 times the amount of modeling, because I can't model something over there in low detail, because if the player goes over there, they can pick something up and pull it right up close. And if it's in low detail, then it's going to look terrible.
Do VR researchers work with sleep researchers? I imagine if you could pull some of the similar concepts from dreaming. When you're dreaming, you don't necessarily notice that the textures are off, but if you look, you see the clock's not moving, you realize you're dreaming.
Yeah, there have been some studies, because early studies show that the effects of VR are similar to lucid dreaming. And there have been some studies about how lucid dreaming and VR experiences are tied together and how they can enable more lucid dreaming. I think I can't actually remember the name of the researcher who published the paper, but it was a couple of years ago. But yeah, it was a fascinating study.
Are you worried at all about what happens as VR starts to become more prevalent in society? Maybe it's a better option for people to pop in there versus live a life.
I mean, we get back to the sort of dystopian cyberpunk theory of people spending all their time in virtual reality rather than real reality, and stop they stop caring about what happens in the real world because this virtual world is so much nicer or more fun, or allows them to live out their fantasies of what they've always wanted to be able to do. I think like all mediums, all pastimes, there's always going to be people who will be, keen to uh, take it to to the limit and spend too much time. But if people have an addictive personality, there's nothing to say they're going to get more addicted to VR than they would do TV or reading or drinking or whatever.
It's more immersive, though. I mean, people are addicted to Facebook, and Facebook sucks.
Yeah, yeah. But then that's just that. I don't know, something about the feedback cycle of just scrolling to see what's next. But I think, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a concern that people are going to get lost. Currently, we're at the stage where people are just trying to outdo each other and how long they can spend in VR for any length of time. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if their actions in VR can somehow have repercussions in the real world in a positive way, then if they stay in VR, I don't see that as a problem. But if they are just teenagers playing a virtual war that's actually controlling robots on the battlefield in the real world, then that's obviously not a great thing.
What about homeless people you want to get off the street?
Um, well, I'd rather put them through more of a sort of education and a beneficiary program rather than just sticking them in VR.
What if it's cheaper? What if it's cheaper, though? I'm just playing devil's advocate a little.
I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of alternative ways to deal with homeless other than sticking them in VR, which are cheaper, I'm sure, in terms of how you would ensure that they are, nourished and maintained whilst they're in VR. If you're going to build a room full of VR to put homeless in, just build a room with a load of beds and a kitchen or something.
How do you think about regulation going forward and any type of code of ethics we should create? We've seen what can happen with social media companies and surveillance capitalism when it's unchecked, and when you're quite literally experiencing everything someone's experiencing. You can control them. You can fill their life with ads. You can Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be like a series of opt-in systems now. But then, if you look at how net neutrality is being stripped away currently, then it's a very dangerous precedent. But then also, if you look at the generations who've grown up with social media and have grown up with the norms of oversharing, um, you know, these are issues that already exist, and I don't think it's going to get any worse or any better. But there's a real sense of presence when you're with other people in VR, and harassment, online harassment. There's many. There are mechanics to put in place to reduce social VR harassment that are easier to enforce than people just commenting randomly on websites or Twitter trolls, etc.
I like that you bring up presence. Do you think VR can be a bit like modern meditation, get people into a better state of being because they can't be distracted by things? They're suddenly immersed in something they can't escape.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few meditation apps already, and there's a couple of companies based purely around the transcendental side of virtual reality rather than the training or the gaming side. And like you say, because you are contained within specifically that environment without distraction, then logically it should be easier to reach that meditative state. I think the major drawback at the moment is it's quite hard to forget that you've got the actual headset on. And for me, I can't go more than a couple of hours until I've got to take a break and I've got to take it off and mop my face and get some fresh air. But as they get smaller devices, lighter, streaming without all the hardware, and screens get lighter. I mean, Samsung unveiled their foldable phone today. It looks pretty terrible. It's a massive brick, but this is the DK1. This is the Apple One of the iPhone that nobody even knew about or really cared about. And it was what the 3GS version of the iPhone, and when it actually started going interstellar. So smaller, foldable, more lightweight screens are coming, and just being able to, I wear glasses anyway, so for me, wearing a pair of glasses and having everything augmented or virtualized over the top won't distract from my ability to meditate or get into the experience.
How do you think about the future of mixed reality and computing? Will it be cell phones? Will it be glasses? Will it be VR? Or will it be something else entirely?
Um, It'll probably be a device that can flip between the states, between VR and AR, and once the sensors, once the optics, once the projection systems reach a level that everything can be lightweight enough and combined into a single unit. People don't want to. They don't have different phones for different devices or different purposes. They have one phone that does everything. So if I want a pair of glasses that are my prescription that I can flip between AR and VR. But we're 5, 10 plus years out from that. But ultimately, you need to have the ability to come back to the real world, so you don't end up walking off a cliff.
Exactly. What do you think about Magic Leap and what they're doing?
I'm interested, and it kind of sucks because being in the UK, they don't ship over here yet. So we are looking at ways of getting devices here. I think they were always going to be in a difficult position with the amount of hype, the amount of secrecy, and the amount of unknowns. There was a lot of obvious wild speculation around what the device was and what they were doing and how the technology works. So I think they were probably pressured into having to release the Magic Leap 1, and initial reports of what it currently does is, it's not much more of an upgrade or difference to HoloLens, like HoloLens 1.5 kind of thing. But prototypes, dev kits, whatever they have in their labs, whatever it is that people have seen that has caused them to invest so much money, there's got to be something there. And I think again, we're at that first device, that version 1.0. The next device will be the one that will really be telling, that will show what their technology is actually truly capable of.
So you're not that impressed yet?
Well, I've not tried it, but from what I've read in the videos I've seen, I'm not sure the computational power of the little hip pack and the slightly wider field of view than HoloLens, albeit with a gradient blur on the edge to sort of hide the hard edge of where the field of view ends. I think a lot of the technology with the eye tracking and the hand tracking that it can do, a lot of that hasn't been fully integrated into the apps yet. So I think, give it 6 months, give more developers time to embed on their SDKs and their tool sets, then we'll start to see some much more impressive, transformative applications for it. But until we've actually developed something and I've tried it, I can only really go by sort of secondhand feedback, really.
When do you think we get to a quarter of the population that has some type of headset? A quarter of the first world population?
Well, we're probably a couple of years out, I think. I think, ultimately a lot of it is probably going to come down to when Apple release an AR device. When, predictions suggest, was it 2021, something like that. They've been buying enough companies. They're obviously working on something. There's a lot of, it will be the usual case. Everyone else will do the hard work and the legwork and release a load of devices that won't be quite good enough. And then they'll just take all of that, polish it, and release something for 3 times the amount of money, but it'll be the one that actually sells.
And it'll have 4 years ago specs, unfortunately.
Yeah. But it'll probably still sell in large numbers. But I think ultimately, we're still arguing amongst ourselves within the community of what does VR mean? What does AR mean? Is it XR? Some people are trying to call it ER. What actually is mixed reality? And until we can settle on a set of like norms, then how do we expect the sort of general populace and devices to go mainstream?
How do you define VR? I know you said capital and lowercase.
So when I say lowercase, I mean the old school sort of multi-projection systems where you're not wearing a headset, and so you're looking at a 3D virtual environment, but you're still aware of the rest of the room. But the screen is big enough that if you stand close enough, it kind of works with a wraparound sensation. Uppercase, I very much is headset based, where you are, shuttered into the environment. And the VR is very much you are from a point of view able to interact within that world. You're in the middle of the forest as opposed to on the outside looking in.
What was the best experience you've had so far? The one that blew your mind the most?
I mean, in the early days, when the DK1 first came out, I was so excited. And we got our dev kits, and the only thing available was the Tuscany demo. But that made me super sick because it was only 3 degrees of freedom and use a joypad to move around. And I was so disappointed because I felt sick for about 6 hours afterwards. But that was the one that was like, oh my god, this is actually, it's here, it works. And despite the nausea, it's fantastic. I've always been a massive fan of Res, so getting Res on PlayStation VR and being able to play that in VR as it was designed with a haptic audio vest, making my whole body throbbed to the beat of the techno, was, you know, really transformative and transcendental. But every day, you know, there's hundreds of new experiences being released, and um, simple things like, well, I say simple, but you know, Google Earth VR, just being able to fly anywhere in the world and see it all rendered in 3D, sort of photogrammetry style, and just, you know, last year, um, I got married and we spent 2 weeks going around Italy, and I used Google Earth VR because you can drag the time of the sun around to change the time of day in the shadows. I would look up the hotels that I wanted to stay in or maybe stay in, and then angled myself as if I was on the balcony to work out which ones had the best views of the sunsets and the
That is
sunrises.
so nerdy.
But you know, I've got loads of really nice sunsets and sunrise pictures. So
Touche, touche. What technologies outside of VR are you most excited about?
outside of VR, not a lot, to be honest. I'm mostly so focused on sort of immersive technologies. Um, I think a lot of it has to be, you know, uh, the 5G side of things, and just having, you know, always having faster and faster bandwidth, and allowing us to stream more and more higher quality content. Um, I enjoy using my drone, but then the technology for that is probably going to get to a certain cap and probably not go much further. Um, is it 60 AI who've got the drone that follows you around, with all the um, object avoidance? I can't remember, but yeah, I have to spend so much time on VR and AR for work that, and I don't drive, so electric cars or self-driving cars. I mean, a self-driving car would be great because it means I don't actually have to bother getting a license, I guess.
How do you stay up to date with everything that's happening?
Yeah, a lot of it is from meetups, locally in the area, or typically, you know, we're based in Brighton, which is on the south coast of England. And it's about an hour by train to get up to London, where the majority of the sort of UK technology sector is, um, or Bristol or Manchester, generally places where the BBC have studios of some shape or form. Um, but because it is a small industry anyway, and we're a small country with a lot lower population, then you get to see a lot of the same people at the same events, and um, it's you kind of have to pace yourself, otherwise nothing really seems to change because you always see the same people, and it's only last week, and you know there's only so much advancement you can make in a week. But then um, being seen as a veteran, where we've been working in VR since the relaunch, as it were, with the Oculus DK1. Um, there's a small pool of developers who were developing at that point, and so keeping up with where they've gone on to, um, whether it's like big companies who are doing big, exciting, heavily invested things, or whether they've remained indie and sharing all of these just little sort of like hacks and ideas that they're playing around with. And of course, there's a lot of new people coming on the scene as well. People from other industries, which, you know, you need non-techie people to play with the technology to work out how we can expand it so it helps to become mainstream. Um, a lot of them, you know, they're having to go through the same sort of hard process of learning the ropes and learning what does and doesn't work in VR. But then there's a lot of experiments out there already, and not so much a rule book. And a lot of the rules were there to be broken. You know, early, you know, we can't move people, we can't have locomotion, but now, you know, locomotion is generally fine. But you just have to develop a series of comfort settings to allow people to find their level where they're happy with the experience. But then online as well, I have a good list of people I follow on Twitter for information and think pieces. And then there's a lot of, well, there's fewer than there were, but there's sort of 3 or 4 main sort of VR news sites to do with gaming and the technologies. Ben Lang at Rota VR has tried pretty much every single device and is very, very thorough in his outlook in terms of how he um, reviews and approaches technology and takes it with a no bullshit stance. VR Scout look at very much more experiential and beneficial experiences. Upload cover more sort of the gaming side, and hopefully they'll continue in some shape or form. VR Focus sort of bridges somewhere in between all of those.
So you brought up the motion. Have you tried these trackpad treadmills, these multi-directional treadmills with VR?
I've tried a couple. I haven't seen many great advancements. There's WizDish and Omni treadmill. There's a few devices where you're kind of like hanging from a harness suspended over the trackpad. The one that they used in Ready Player One, that's an actual device. I can't remember what it's called, but that is a device that you can, buy and use today. I don't have the space for it in my own place. We probably will do on our new VR lab in a new studio when we move in a couple of weeks. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I haven't. They haven't given me enough of a positive sensation to warrant spending the money to get one. I don't have a problem with my. They're looking to fix a problem which is current, where we can't move very much with cables. And I don't know. People are lazy. People just want to be sat down, and they don't want to be running around everywhere all the time. And can you imagine playing Call of Duty or something like that for an hour, hour and a half, having to constantly run across the map? We're all going to be very fit, but I think we're probably going to, have heart attacks before we get to that point.
I guess it depends on the ramp up. So you mentioned BBC. What's the relation there, and what's the future of news and entertainment?
Well, it just seems to be that BBC, wherever they have a studio, there's a good, there's always there's been a big sort of tech cluster around the BBC studio. They commission a lot of external content, and they're very responsive to new technologies. So in the UK, they're a good way to get funded development work for narrative storytelling experiences, if that's sort of the focus of your studio. And they always look into new ways of bringing the news to people. So they have dedicated VR and AR labs now and immersive content studios. And in terms of how they portray the news, they've done a lot of experiments with 360 reports and videos. Ultimately these days it's more about the content of the news rather than how it's being delivered. But we have our own situation here in the UK in the form of Brexit, where you guys have got Trump, and how the current government is supported or portrayed by the local news. We have a much smaller range than the US, but the BBC is generally supposed to be non-biased, but there's a lot of encouragement of the Brexit process because it's what the government wants.
Does that worry you at all? News and politics collaborating?
Well, news, technology, politics,
Power.
church, etc. All of these things should remain siloed and separate. News should always be objective and balanced and non-biased. Otherwise, we just get into a 1984 state where we're dealing with departments of change and where nothing changes, and we are just subservient beings. But the internet allows much more than just the terrestrial channels and terrestrial sources, and then we just have to get into the realms of what people consider to be truth, and valid data sources, really. But yeah, it's essentially, it's a terrifying time in the fact that people believe absolute nonsense, but it's because of the prevalence of the connected world. People have always believed nonsense, but now you actually meet them and come up against them online, and they have a louder voice.
Well, it's not just the nonsense, it's also the fact that it can be disproven. If you go back 1,000, 2,000 years, people believed nonsense, but the information and the fact that they were full of shit was not available to anyone else.
True.
It's
But
complicated.
no matter how many reliable disproving facts and evidence, once a believer, it's hard to get them to change their mind, because then they have to admit that they were wrong.
World looks flat in VR, right? Would you would you rather visit Mars quite literally if you could return, or do a VR trip and make it a little shorter?
Well, I've seen Total Recall. It didn't look great, but we made a VR experience based on Elon Musk's Starman sending the astronaut costume in the Tesla. I think it's made it to Mars now, but yeah, I think the thought of space travel has always intrigued me. I don't know if my rapidly aging body would stand up to it, but yeah, I'm more than happy to have space experiences if they are based on scientific evidence and what we know of those places. If I want to play a computer game based on an alien world and it's all make believe, that's fine. But if I'm going to virtual representations of actual planets, I want to go to a realistic representation and know that this is actually how it is based upon satellite and data that we have.
Let's say 30 years from now, a massive percentage of the population has access to VR and all sorts of ubiquitous experiences. What do you say the odds are? Do you think there'll be more people focused on relatively realistic situations, so maybe slight differences in gravity, different places, etc., or more focused on completely unrealistic situations?
I imagine it would be completely Black Mirror style, unrealistic situations. Um, the sci-fi dystopia where anybody can be represented however they want, and if they're augmenting the real world, they're able to block out types of people, or exes, or whoever that they don't want to see or be interacting with. But then there's probably going to be it'll probably come full circle where people will just be so sick of the virtual that they'll disconnect, and
Sounds like Facebook.
yeah, they'll want to actually experience what's truly real again.
I think that would be a great takeaway for people. How do you think about VR and empathy? And which industries do you think it'll take off in first, outside of military and sports?
So VR is oft called the empathy machine. From the work that we've done and from the experiences we've created and some of the training material we're looking at, beyond just using it to train people how to fix stuff, there's a lot of interest around the soft skills side of things, and being able to put somebody in somebody else's shoes. But then there's a strong argument, or at the moment, is it empathy or just sympathy? There's clear distinct barriers or differences between just feeling sorry for someone by watching a immersive story, or actually feeling connected to that person. So I think we're a ways off. There are ways. It is more immersive. It does provide a greater connection to the story. But I think storytellers are still learning how to make best use of the medium to really give that level of empathy or connection that people feel with a sort of director's window within the sort of more traditional film mediums. Oh, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
What industries do you think will take off in primarily first, outside of sports and military, obviously?
I think a lot of it will be, the all-encompassing entertainment sphere, in terms of, films and media and gaming, experiential stuff that allows you to become, a space trooper or go on a dinosaur park exploration scenario, allowing people to try something that they couldn't do in the real world. That may even be, a rich man simulator with yachts and filthy money. But I see the biggest area as being training and simulation and learning development and bettering ourselves. And I'd like to hope that that is one of the key areas that people want to pick these devices up to do, to enable us to learn faster and become better people, and then through the socially connected experiences, meet and understand what it means to be human.
I would hope so. I'm very skeptical, though, based off of what people watch on Netflix.
Yeah, and based upon general online behavior.
Oh God.
But I'm always a glass half full kind of guy, so I like to think that as humans by default we are good, and this is just the stage we're in now is the death of sort of a particular style of thinking, where it was all very segregated and mistrustful, and it's the birth of a much more diverse, accepting sort of humankind. But we're all learning the ways of how to adopt and how to operate in that world. And we're making those mistakes, and it's teething pains. But I think give it a couple of decades, we'll learn how to coexist.
Yeah, we all got to get teeth. Do you have kids?
Yeah. No, I have cats.
You have cats. Okay, so they probably haven't tried VR. I was going to see what you thought about that and VR for kids.
Well, Luca from the Google Daydream prototyping team, his business card is actually a little Google Cardboard, and I have tried putting it on my cat, but they seem to be perfectly sized for cats.
God, that would be terrifying to think about what's happening in the cat's head. So
Yeah.
I got two questions for you.
Okay.
So first question, if you had to leave people with something, a quote, a call to action, it can be anything, what would it be and why?
The call to action would be go to your nearest VR arcade and try VR if you haven't. Leave aside your skepticism or dislike of technology and just try a simple experience and understand what the possibilities are. We always spend less time talking about it and more time just getting headsets on people. It's far easier to convey the possibilities.
And I would one up that. I would say spend the extra 10 to 20 bucks it's going to cost for half an hour, and do the one where you can get the gloves in the hands and have a bit more the gloves in the feet, so you have a bit more of an experience moving around.
Yeah.
That immersion is really what does. I was scared shitless when I was walking and suddenly the floor fell out, and I'm terrified of heights, and it's like, oh my God. It's hard to say how real it feels, and that's even later generation. It's not the new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people frozen in spot, absolutely terrified by a simple construction site simulator, where all they're doing is standing on the edge of a scaffolding, and they just lose all memory of the fact that they are in an office space on a perfectly solid floor. It's a very powerful experience, but with great power comes great responsibility of how we treat the VR user.
It does. How do we avoid having VR be a monopoly?
Be a monopoly. Well, there's a number of uh, uh, systems and mechanics in place with open VR and forums working together to ensure that compatibility and interoperability across platforms exists. I think with any new format, then there's always going to be the race by those who want to seek to control and dominate. But then there's always going to be those who will seek to ensure that it remains open. It didn't take long for Revive to pop up to ensure that Vive users could use gated Oculus content. We just have to pick our battles wisely and ensure that whenever we're creating content, we're looking to make it as open and supporting of as many platforms as possible within our budget and timeframes as allowing.
Amen. And last one, have to piggyback off of that a little bit. Who is the leading player in VR 10 years from now?
Leading player from now, probably someone we've never heard of.
I hope so.
I mean, there's some big names that have already thrown their hats in the ring. Some of those big names are continuing to throw more hats in the ring. Some have thrown one in and kind of forgotten about it. But I think it's probably going to be like a consortium because there's so many technologies we've touched upon already with cloud and 5G and eye tracking and foveated rendering and screen technologies and prescription models, etc. That I think it's going to have to be a consortium device where everybody who excels in their area but is too big to be bought by anyone else, they all come together to create the ultimate device that will be the one that has to be owned. But I don't think it's going to be Apple or Microsoft or Facebook or Google.
Thankfully, Facebook and Google both suck at hardware. Where is the best place for people to find you, Sam?
I'm available on the Twitters at VR_Sam. You can follow our studio profile, MakeReal VR. Same with the website, makereal.co.uk. And generally, if you search for Sam Watts VR in Google, you'll find absolute number of articles, podcasts, quotes, interviews, etc. that I've done over the past 5 years as part of my journey of learning how all this stuff works.
It's because he's a VR superstar, a little humble as well. Disruptors.fm, guys. We got the show notes and all the good stuff there. Thanks for coming today, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Sweet. Cheers. That was good.